I knew within the first year of my marriage that my husband was not the great love of my life, and I stayed anyway. And we were married for 51 years until his death. And I want to tell you that the 51 years produced something that I could not have found with the great love of my life or with anyone else. And that the something it produced is the most valuable thing I have ever been given. And that I would make the same choice again without hesitation, which is not the ending that story is supposed to have, and which is, I have come to understand at 81, the truest thing I know about love and what it actually is. My name is Barbara. I'm 81 years old, and what I want to tell you today is not a warning and not a comfort exactly, but an honest account of what a long marriage actually is and what it can become when you stop waiting for it to be something it was never going to be and start paying attention to what it actually is. I need to begin with the honesty that the story requires, which means beginning with what I knew, and when I knew it, and what I did with the knowing, because the knowing is the part that people find hardest to understand when I tell them this, the part that produces the response of "why didn't you leave?" as if the knowing required a particular action, and as if the action I took instead requires explanation or defense. It does not require defense, but it does require explanation, and the explanation is the whole of what I am trying to tell you. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, the middle child of 5, in a family that was large and loud and organized around the kitchen table in the way of families who understand that the kitchen table is where everything important happens, where arguments are resolved and plans are made, and the daily news of 5 children's lives is exchanged and absorbed by 2 parents who are genuinely interested in all of it. My father was a plumber who had his own small business and who approached the business with the same practical and attentive competence that he brought to everything in his life. And my mother was a woman of considerable intelligence who had not had the education her intelligence merited, and who expressed that intelligence in the raising of 5 children with a thoroughness and a creativity that I understand now is the application of a first-rate mind to the work that was available to it. I was, of the 5 of us, the romantic one. I want to say that because it matters to the story, because the romantic one is the one for whom the idea of the great love is most thoroughly cultivated, most carefully tended, most thoroughly woven into the understanding of what a life should contain and what marriage is supposed to be. I had been reading novels since I was 12 years old, with the specific hunger of someone who is finding in fiction the emotional vocabulary that the world around her has not provided, and what I had assembled from those novels was a picture of love that was vivid and consuming, and organized around the recognition, the specific and immediate knowing that arrives when you encounter the person who is yours, the person the world arranged to cross your path, the person whose presence produces in you a certainty that this is the one. I was 23 years old when I met Gordon, who was 26, at a party given by a mutual friend in the spring of 1967. He was not the one. I want to say that clearly and without cruelty, because Gordon was a good man, one of the genuinely good men I have known in my life, and the not the one is not a diminishment of him, but a description of what I felt in the first months of knowing him, which was warmth and comfort and the pleasant ease of someone whose company I liked and whose character I respected, and not the consuming recognition, not the certainty, not the vivid and particular thing I had been reading about since I was 12, and that I had been waiting for with the specific patience of someone who believes it is coming. He was tall and quiet in a way that I found, initially, restful. He worked as a civil engineer for the city, designing the infrastructure of drainage systems and roads, and the unglamorous but essential architecture of a functional city. And he brought to that work the same quality he brought to everything, which was careful and systematic attention, the methodical movement through a problem from its beginning to its resolution, the satisfaction of the thing done correctly, rather than the excitement of the thing done brilliantly. He was not exciting. I knew that from the beginning. He was steady and reliable and genuinely kind, and he had a sense of humor that was dry and quiet and took a moment to arrive at. The humor of someone who had observed something precisely and was offering the observation rather than performing for your benefit. He liked me very much from the beginning, and he told me so with the directness of a man who had decided something and saw no reason to be indirect about it, and I liked him back in the warm and comfortable way that I knew, even as I liked him, was not the way I had been reading about. I told myself it would grow. That is the first thing I told myself in the months of our courtship, the reasonable and adult thing that the romantic girl was telling herself, that the calm and comfortable liking would develop with time and proximity and the shared life of two people who are genuinely compatible, into something more like the consuming thing, that the novels were perhaps exaggerating the immediacy of it, and that the real version arrived more slowly and built rather than ignited. We married in June of 1968. I was 24 years old, and I wore a dress that my mother had helped me choose, and I stood at the front of the church and made the promises in the genuine and fully intentional way of someone who has decided and is not performing the decision but making it. And I meant what I said, and I meant to keep what I said. And I walked back down the aisle as Gordon's wife with the warm and comfortable feeling that had been the consistent quality of my experience of him from the beginning. And underneath the warmth and the comfort, quiet but present, the knowledge that this was not the consuming thing, and that I did not know yet what to do with that knowledge. I knew by the first anniversary. Not that I had made a mistake exactly, because the word mistake implies an error in judgment, and I am not sure, even now, that the judgment was in error. I knew that what I had married was not the great love of the novels, and that it was not going to become the great love of the novels, that the warm and comfortable liking was what it was going to be, and that the consuming recognition was not going to arrive now that we were married, in the way I had told myself it would arrive. I knew this with the quiet certainty of someone who has stopped telling herself a story and started paying attention to the actual situation. And I sat with the knowing for a long time that first year, privately and without telling Gordon or my mother or anyone else, because the knowing did not come with an obvious next step, and because the sitting with it was, in some way, I could not yet articulate, the right thing to do. I did not leave. I want to explain why with the specificity it deserves, because the explanation is not the one that people usually offer for the choice to stay in a marriage that is not the great love, which is usually some combination of social pressure and financial dependence, and the absence of a clear alternative, none of which were my primary reasons. My primary reason was something more interior and more honest than any of those, which is that I sat with the knowing, and I examined what I was proposing to leave, and what I was proposing to leave it for. And what I found in the examination was that what I was proposing to leave was a good man who loved me genuinely, and who was not the great love of the novels, and that what I was proposing to leave it for was the possibility of finding the great love of the novels, and that the possibility was a fiction, a story I had assembled from 12 years of reading, and that a fiction was a poor reason to leave a good man who loved me genuinely. That is the reason I stayed. Not duty, not convention, not the absence of options, but the honest assessment of a 25-year-old woman who had enough clarity, or enough of something, to understand that the consuming recognition she had been waiting for was not a reliable guide to what a life should contain, and that what she had was real and what she was waiting for was not. I want to tell you what the marriage was, across the years, because the telling of why I stayed is not the same as the telling of what I stayed for, and the what I stayed for is the more important part. Gordon and I settled into the life of two people who are well matched in the ways that daily life requires matching, which is to say we were compatible in temperament and in values, and in the practical organization of a shared existence. And the compatibility produced, across years and decades, a quality of ease that I came to understand as one of the most valuable things a marriage can contain. We did not fight in the consuming, passionate way of couples who are in the consuming, passionate kind of love. We disagreed, regularly and without heat, about the things that two people with different approaches to the world will disagree about, and we resolved the disagreements with the practical efficiency of people who understand that the resolution is more important than the victory, and who have no particular investment in winning at the expense of the other person. We had 3 children, a daughter named Ellen in 1970, and twin sons named Mark and Daniel in 1973. And the children were the first place I understood something about what the marriage was that I had not understood before they came. What I understood, watching Gordon with Ellen from the first days of her life, was that the quality I had identified as steadiness and reliability, and the systematic movement through problems was also, in the context of fatherhood, the quality of a man who showed up completely and consistently for the people who needed him, who was present in the specific and unglamorous way that children need their parents to be present, the way of someone who does not find the ordinary demands of parenting beneath his attention, but who treats the bath time and the school pickup and the Tuesday evening homework as the actual substance of his relationship with his children rather than the background noise of a life lived elsewhere. He was a better father than I had expected him to be. I want to say that honestly, because the expectation was not low exactly. I knew he was a good man, but the specific quality of his fathering surprised me, with its completeness and its consistency and its warmth. The warmth that was quieter than my mother's warmth, but no less real. And watching him with the children produced in me something I had not felt before in my relationship with him, which was a form of love that was different from the warm and comfortable liking I had always felt, different in its quality, deeper somehow, more rooted in the actual person he was, rather than in my experience of being with him. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I do not want to construct a narrative in which the marriage transformed into the consuming thing over time, because that is not what happened, and that transformation is not the point of what I am telling you. What happened was something different, and more interesting than that, which is that I began to understand, slowly and without announcement, that the warm and comfortable liking I had always felt for Gordon was not a lesser version of the consuming love of the novels, but a different thing entirely, a different category of human connection that the novels I had been reading had not accounted for, that did not ignite, but accumulated, that was not recognized in a moment, but built across years of shared ordinary life, and that was, in the building, producing something that I did not have a name for, but that I was increasingly aware of as real and as valuable and as not available through any other means than the specific means by which it was being built. It was a night in 1978, 10 years into the marriage, that I want to describe because it is the night I came closest to understanding, in the middle of the marriage rather than at the end of it, what the marriage actually was. Ellen was 8 years old, and she had been ill for several days, with a fever that had been worrying the doctor and worrying me, and that had broken the previous evening, and Gordon and I were sitting in the kitchen at 10 o'clock at night after the children were all asleep, both of us tired in the particular way of parents who have been managing worry and still managing everything else that requires managing. And he made tea without being asked and set a cup in front of me and sat down, and we sat there in the quiet kitchen and drank tea and did not say very much. And what I felt in that kitchen was something I had not felt before and have thought about many times since. What I felt was home. Not the house, not the kitchen, not the geographic location, but the interior condition of being in the right place with the right person, of being with someone in whose presence you are completely yourself and completely at ease and completely, in a way that is hard to articulate, but that I felt that night with a clarity I could not dismiss, not alone. I sat with that feeling in the kitchen, and I thought, so this is what this is. Not the consuming thing. This. And this was, I understood that night, not the lesser version of the consuming thing, but its own thing, its own complete and genuine thing. And the genuineness of it was not diminished by the absence of the consuming quality, but was, in fact, related to the absence of it, was in some way produced by the steadiness and the accumulation and the 10 years of ordinary life lived together that the consuming thing, with its immediacy and its ignition, could not have produced. We went through difficulties. I want to say that because the portrait of a marriage as a warm and gradually deepening ease could be mistaken for a portrait of a marriage without difficulty, and no such marriage exists, and mine was not an exception. We had a period in our mid-30s when the children were young and the demands of a family with 3 children were at their most consuming, when something had gone quiet between us in a way that was not hostile, but was not right either. A withdrawal of the specific quality of attention we gave each other. That was not visible in the management of the daily life, but that was present in the interior space between us as an absence where something had previously been. I addressed it. That is what I did. And I want to say that I addressed it because the marriage was worth addressing it. Because 10 years in I had understood that the thing I had built with Gordon was worth the uncomfortable work of maintaining it, and the addressing required a conversation that neither of us was naturally inclined toward, because Gordon was not a man who found conversations about the interior state of a relationship easy or natural, and I was not a woman who found the initiating of such conversations comfortable, regardless of my belief in their necessity. I told him I had noticed the quiet, and that I missed what had been there before the quiet, and I asked him what was happening for him. And he was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when he was thinking seriously about something. And then he told me something that I had not known, and that changed the quality of the conversation entirely, which was that he had been afraid, for the past year or so, that what he had to offer was not enough for me, that he was aware of his own quietness and steadiness, and the unremarkable quality of his particular gifts in a world that valued the more dramatic kind, and that he had been carrying this awareness in a way that had made him pull back rather than risk the confirmation of the fear. I did not know he had been carrying that. I want to say that because the not knowing is important, because it means that the quiet I had noticed was not indifference or distance, but the specific retreat of a man who was afraid that what he was not sufficient for the woman he had married, and the retreat had produced in me the experience of distance rather than of a man protecting himself from what he feared. And the distance had produced in me the awareness that something was missing, and neither of us had known what was happening in the other until we said it, which is the argument for saying the difficult things to the people you have decided to build a life with, even when the saying is uncomfortable, and even when the natural inclination is to manage the discomfort rather than address it. After that conversation we were different, not dramatically different. Gordon was not a man of dramatic changes, but consistently and perceptibly different in the specific way of 2 people who have understood something about each other that they did not understand before, and who have integrated the understanding into the fabric of the marriage in a way that changes its texture, makes it slightly more honest and slightly more present, and slightly more willing to say the difficult things when the difficult things are what the situation calls for. We had 20 more years of that marriage, the post-conversation version, and the 20 years were the best of it, the years in which the accumulation of shared life had produced the depth and the ease and the specific intimacy of people who know each other in the full sense, who have been present to each other's fears and vulnerabilities and failures, and who have continued anyway, who have chosen each other not once at the altar, but repeatedly and daily, and with the full knowledge of what they are choosing. Gordon died in 2019. He was 78 years old, and he died at home, which was what he wanted, and I was beside him, which was what I wanted, and the death was quiet and unhurried in the way that some deaths are, the way that seems continuous with the life, rather than a disruption of it. And in the days after his death, I found myself in the specific grief of someone who has lost the person who was the primary architecture of their daily life. The grief that is not only for the person, but for the specific texture of the days that included them, and that now have to be rebuilt around the absence. I want to tell you about the grief, because I think the grief is the most honest account of what the marriage was that I can offer, more honest than any description of the marriage itself, because grief shows you what you had by showing you what is missing, and the shape of what is missing is the shape of what was there. What was missing in the weeks and months after Gordon died was not passion, not the consuming thing, not anything that could be described in the vocabulary of the romantic love I had been waiting for at 23. What was missing was the presence of the person who had been the consistent and reliable witness to my life for 51 years, who had known me at 24, and at 45, and at 60, and at 72, who had been present for every version of me, and who had continued to choose me at each version, who had provided, across 5 decades, the specific and irreplaceable service of being the person in whose presence I was most fully and completely myself. The loss of that was enormous. It was the largest loss of my life, larger than any loss I had experienced before it, and the enormity of it was itself information, was the evidence, delivered finally and without ambiguity, of what the marriage had been, of what the warm and comfortable thing that I had always known was not the consuming love had actually been, which was something that had no good name in the vocabulary I had assembled from 12 years of reading novels, something that the novels had not accounted for, something quieter and slower and more interior than the consuming thing, and that had, across 51 years of ordinary life lived together, produced a depth of connection that I would not trade for any version of the consuming thing I can imagine. My daughter Ellen came to stay with me for 2 weeks after Gordon died, and one evening she asked me something that I want to tell you about, because my answer to it is the most honest thing I have said about the marriage in the 2 years since his death. She asked me, with the directness and the love of a daughter who wants to know the truth about her parents, whether I had been happy. Not whether the marriage had been good, not whether I had regrets, but whether I had been happy. And I sat with the question for a moment before I answered it, because it deserved more than the reflexive yes that is the conventional answer to such questions. I told her that happiness was not quite the right word for what the marriage had been, and that I had spent some of my life, particularly in the early years, aware of that, aware that what I had was not the version of happiness I had originally been looking for. And then I told her that what I had found instead, over 51 years of looking at it and living inside it, and finally, at some point in my 50s that I cannot locate precisely, accepting it for what it was, rather than measuring it against what it wasn't, was something that I valued more than the happiness I had been looking for, something that I can only describe as the specific and irreplaceable satisfaction of having been known by another person across a full and long life, and of having known them in a return, and that the knowing had required the 51 years and the 3 children, and the quiet kitchen, and the difficult conversation in the mid-30s, and every ordinary unremarkable Tuesday evening across 5 decades, and that it could not have been achieved any faster or by any other means, and that it was, in its particular way and on its own terms, the thing I am most grateful for in my entire life. She cried a little when I said that, not from sadness, I think, or not only from sadness, but from the recognition of something she had watched across her entire life, without having the words for it until I gave them to her. The recognition of her parents as 2 people who had built something real across a long time, and who had done it without the dramatic architecture of the consuming love, had done it in the quiet and the steadiness, and the systematic movement through the shared life that was her father's characteristic quality, and that had become, across 51 years, the quality of the marriage itself. I want to say something about the great love I did not marry, because I think the story I am telling could be misread as the story of someone who settled and made the best of it, and that is not the story I am telling. The great love of the novels, the consuming and immediate recognition, is a real thing. I am not dismissing it. I have known people who had it and whose lives were shaped by it, and who would not trade it for anything, and I believe them. But what I am telling you is that there is another kind of love, a quieter and slower kind, that does not arrive in a recognition, but accumulates across the shared ordinary of a long and genuine life with another person, and that this kind of love is not the lesser version of the consuming kind, but is its own complete and real thing with its own particular qualities that the consuming kind cannot produce. The qualities it produces are the qualities of the long view. Not the excitement of the beginning, but the depth of the middle and the particular richness of the end. The end in which you're sitting beside someone who has known you at 24 and at 40 and at 65, who has seen you at your best and your worst and your most ordinary, and who has continued to find your company worth choosing. And that continued choosing across 51 years of ordinary days is not less than the consuming love of the novels. It is a different thing, and it is, in certain ways, and for certain people more, because it is built rather than found, and because the building is the thing. The building is where the actual substance of a shared life is produced. I am 81 years old, and I live alone in the house that Gordon and I shared for 43 years, and that I will probably continue to live in for whatever years remain to me. And I am not lonely in it, because the house is full of him, full of the accumulated evidence of a life shared with someone who is steady and quiet and reliable, and genuinely kind, and who was not the great love of the novels, and who was, across 51 years of showing up consistently and completely for the life we built together, the great love of my actual life, which turned out to be a different category than the novels accounted for. I would do it again. I want to say that one more time with the full weight of what I mean by it, because I said it at the beginning, and I want to say it at the end, with the evidence behind it that the beginning did not yet have. Not because the choice without cost, because it was not, because the 24-year-old who walked back down the aisle without the consuming recognition was carrying something real, and the carrying of it took years to resolve into understanding. But because the life that the choice produced was worth everything the choice required, and because what I know at 81 about love, and what it is, and what it can become in the long, patient ordinary of a shared life, is something I could not have known at 24, and could not have found by any path other than the path I took, which was the path of staying, of choosing the warm and comfortable thing over the possibility of the consuming thing, and of waiting, across 51 years of the warm and comfortable, to understand what it was actually capable of becoming. It was capable of becoming everything. That is what I want to tell you. Not everything the novels promised, because that is a different kind of everything, but everything that a life lived fully and honestly, in genuine company with another person, is capable of becoming, which is a great deal more than the 24-year-old romantic girl understood when she stood at the front of the church in June of 1968 and said yes to the quiet and steady man she liked very much and did not yet love in the way she understood love. She loves him now, present tense, because I find that the love does not go into the past when the person does, finds instead a different residence in the interior, and I am still, at 81, in the ongoing experience of loving Gordon, in the grief that is also a form of love, in the gratitude that is also a form of love, in the quiet house full of the evidence of what we built together that is in its way the clearest picture I have of what love actually is and what it requires and what it is capable of producing when you give it the time and the ordinary life and the continued choosing that it needs. It needs a long time. That is the thing the novels do not tell you. The real thing, not the consuming thing, but the built thing, the accumulated and deepening and fully knowing thing, needs a long time and a great deal of Tuesday evenings, and the willingness to stay when staying is harder than it looks from the outside. And what it produces at the end of the long time is not what you were looking for at the beginning, and is better than what you were looking for at the beginning. And the better is only available at the end of the long time, which means the long time was necessary, and the staying was necessary, and the choice I made at 24, which did not feel like the romantic choice, and which was not the romantic choice, was the choice that led me here. Here is enough. Here, with Gordon in every corner of this house, and in my children's faces, and in the particular way I make tea. Without thinking about it, that is not the way I made tea before I spent 51 years making it alongside him. Here is more than enough. That is what I wanted to tell you.